So I got an upgrade to professor. That's good. Anyway, it's a pleasure to be here with you this afternoon and to have the opportunity to talk to you about Factor Therapeutics. This is a Brisbane-based biotech company, and I'm pretty sure that some of you in the room would remember it as Tissue Therapies. It was a corporate turnaround project for the last 2 years, and it's been a pretty interesting journey. One of those examples of a baby biotech company that had very good technology and a very challenging management strategy. And hopefully we can show you that we've made some substantial improvements. This is just to let you know that the future hasn't happened yet. At a glance, so we relaunched the company basically in October, November of 2015, and we refinanced the company around between March and May in the form of a rights issue and placement at 3.5 cents. The market cap at the time that we did the refinancing, including the discount to market, was probably around 10 mil. So it was a very ambitious financing indeed to raise $15 million on a 10 million pre-money valuation. And essentially what we did is we went to the institutional end of the market and we said, look, we're not going to do what a typical ASX biotech does, which is raise a few $1 million and hope for the best and then raise another few $1 million. We're going to finance a proper clinical trial or we're going to shut the company down. And what we were able to do, if you'll pardon the pun, was institutionalize the share registry. So our largest shareholders are Allen Gray, Fidelity, and Acorn Capital, so very excellent funds that did a lot of work on the company to understand whether there was a viable opportunity there or not. We have about given on any day of trading, we have somewhere between a 45 and a 50 mil market cap. Our product, which I'm going to talk about in a second, is part of a pipeline of advanced wound care products, very exciting intellectual property. It originated from the University of Queensland, but we've since taken on other patents and technologies in the same space from other prestigious institutions around the world. Our lead product is to treat venous leg ulcers. I would imagine that some of you in the room would have some personal experience with venous leg ulcers. It's a very unpleasant and debilitating condition and a very serious medical problem around the world. In Europe, our lead product is classified as a medical device. It's a topically applied product. In the United States, we're classified as a biologic drug, which has a little bit of a harder regulatory pathway, but also a much higher upside in terms of the commercial opportunity. So this is our product in a nutshell. This is your biology lesson for the day. It's not as interesting as Argentinian exploration wells. But basically what we have is this is our lead product. And the molecule basically has two parts to it. One part binds to the wound bed and provides a site for skin cells to attach to. And the other part of it is a growth factor. Basically, it stimulates those cells and gives them a little signal to grow and be happy. And this is because in chronic wounds like venous leg ulcers and diabetic foot ulcers, you have these dysfunctional biological environments where there's nothing to sustain cells, there's nothing to sustain skin growth, and that's why they never heal. And so what our product does is it goes in there and it synthetically modifies the wound bed so that it returns somewhat to normal in terms of biological function. Really good science behind it, very rational, good mechanism of action, and we've really proven that this technology works, as I'm going to show you in a second. It has lots of applications, but as I said, the big application for this technology is in chronic wounds. This is our pipeline of products. So our lead product, as I mentioned, is in venous leg ulcers. We also are reformulating that same product in a more viscous form, a little bit more like a gel, and that's for treating diabetic foot ulcers. That's because ulcers that are on the bottom of your feet are a little harder to reach, and they need to have a different sort of consistency of material to apply. There's a new wound care market that's arrived in the last sort of 5 to 10 years, which is in ocular wound care. That's because we have a lot of glaucoma stents being put in. So you make a little incision in the cornea and you put in a stent. And if you don't put something on your cornea to accelerate healing, you can get these peripheral sort of cloudy occlusions, which are incredibly annoying. So if you go and talk to the big eye care companies and ask them what is the #1 product missing from their portfolio, they'll tell you it's wound care products for ocular care. So that's a really exciting market, and we'll be putting out an announcement in about 2 weeks on the progress that we've been making with that program, which is pretty exciting. And then last of all, we announced earlier in the year a collaboration with Monash University in an ultra-rare congenital skin condition. Well, it's more than a skin condition. It's called harlequinichthyosis. And basically what it is, it's a condition where you're born with a genetic defect such that your skin doesn't close properly as a barrier. It forms all these cracks and fissures. And you know, the skin's an incredibly important defense mechanism for your body, for infection and for a whole lot of other issues, moisture and just your overall immune function. And so we have a very promising drug candidate in that space that's generated a lot of interest. And I'm sure some of you know that orphan drugs are a sort of section of the biotech market that have a very large commercial appeal at the moment. So for our lead program, basically how it works, one of the challenges with therapeutics and wound care is that you know, wound care is, most patients are treated in the community setting. They're not treated by docs, they're treated by nurses and home carers and family members. So if you really want to have a product that is effective in this market, you have to have something that the average person can use. There's a lot of wound care products out there that are being developed that are fancy cell therapies and surgical interventions, and clearly the average person looking after their elderly relative is not going to perform a surgical intervention at home, right? So we have a product, it's a little pre-filled syringe. It's spring-loaded, you pop the button and it floods, irrigates the wound with the drug. And it's designed to be used once a week. We've shown in clinical trials that using it more often doesn't provide a great benefit. And that's important because when patients have their their bandages changed, they usually have it done once a week. So their moisture dressings and their compression bandaging typically gets changed once a week because it starts to get a bit smelly if you don't do that. So this is actually a really game changer product because if you think about wound care market, and some of you will know, in the sort of commoditized end of wound care, there are a lot of products like antimicrobials and bandages and moisture dressings and Manuka honey and all kinds of things. And some of those have a benefit, but most of the time you're treating patients that are going to heal anyway. So providing you don't mess around too much with the wound, it will generally heal with proper bandaging. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you have patients where there's a real possibility of amputation or a more serious surgical intervention. So we treat this middle population, which is actually a very large percentage of patients. They're treated in the community setting, but they often have their wounds for a very long period of time. So we treated patients in our last clinical trial where they'd had wounds that were 3 to 5 years old. Our oldest patient had a wound that went for 10 years. Now, not all wounds that sort of progress for 10 years can be treated straightforwardly, but some of them can. They just exist in this chronic state. This is an infographic we put together fairly recently, which sort of shows you in a single visual impact why what we're doing is so important. It's not just about cost to the healthcare system. It's not just about lost productivity, but it's about quality of life. People that have this condition, they do suffer from a lot of other things that are the direct extension of their disease. But there is a cost, and that's for whoever comes along and develops a drug in this space, it's a real prize to win. And I'll tell you transparently, there are probably 35 or 40 drugs that have failed in this space. It's an incredibly difficult condition to treat, and that's because not all wounds are the same. The underlying venous disease, that causes venous leg ulcers is highly variable, and some patients have it so severe that you really can't intervene straightforwardly. So this is a really tough condition to treat, but as I said, whoever picks up the opportunity is going to do very well out of it. So we're running a large multi-center phase 2 trial in the US right now, and it's an important trial for us because it'll determine whether this product really has commercial viability. Most biotech companies that would try to tackle an indication like this, wouldn't expect to run a phase 3 trial. They'd typically partner for phase 3. And we have the particular advantage that our phase 2 trial is also our final trial for Europe. So as we're running a phase 2 trial in the US, it's also satisfying the regulatory requirements for product submission in Europe. And so to make this a successful trial for us, we actually have to technically accomplish 2 things. First of all, we want to avoid the scenario where we include patients going into the trial that are probably going to heal anyhow. So if you just bandage them up and treat them properly, they'll heal because those tend to blow the statistics out on a clinical trial. And we also don't want to include patients in the trial that are never going to heal from anything. So if you have a very severe wound, there's a lot of comorbidities, and no single therapy will treat a patient. And so what we want to do is focus on a patient population where we can really move the needle. And so we've gained quite a bit of notoriety in the wound care space because we're the first company in the world that's ever run what's called a precision wound care trial. That is, we select patients for the drug on the basis of their suitability for our drug. It turns out there's a very good epidemiologist at the University of Pennsylvania, a guy called David Margolis, and what he did is he showed that if you can study the underlying extent of venous disease, you can classify the wounds by severity. A 0 is a mild wound, a 2 is a serious wound. And it turns out that our product does a very, very good job of treating these ones, these middle severity patients, where they still have a significant chronic wound, but they have enough underlying venous support that there's still blood flow and so forth. And these patients are important because these are the ones out there in the community setting that have wounds for a very, very long time. And so they cost the healthcare system the biggest bucks, which I'll show you in a second. And so it turned out that when we did our last clinical trial, we were able to determine that in that patient population, which is about 30 to 40% of patients, and to be clear, it's a multi-million patient opportunity globally, that we're able to effectively accelerate the healing rate by about 300% in those patients. So it's a very substantial market opportunity for our product if we're successful. And we don't currently have competition in that space. In fact, it's interesting. In the US right now, there's not a single other trial running in venous leg ulcers because it's essentially considered to be an area where you can't develop a drug. We actually show efficacy in that patient population. It's really exciting. And so this leads to a very interesting market segmentation strategy because although we might only treat 30% of patients, a select 30% that we know that the drug works in terms of cost to the healthcare system, is probably more like 50% of the cost. So when we go and we talk to regulators about getting reimbursement for this product, we have a pretty receptive conversation. And because we're probably about a year from commercialization in Europe, that's a discussion that we're already starting to have. For those of you that are interested in clinical trials and like to know the nitty-gritty details, this is it. I won't go through it in line by line because it's probably a bit boring, but just suffice to say that we're treating 168 patients. It's a placebo-controlled randomized trial, so it's a proper trial. We've got an A-team clinical group running it. It's being run in 25 centers across the United States, including some very high-end hospitals like Georgetown and University of North Carolina, and fairly famous hospitals that have excellent clinical practice. And the important thing is that we're studying two things. We're studying wound closure, and we're studying pain reduction. And one of the exciting things that came out of our last clinical trial is we found that patients that healed really well had a notable reduction in pain. And that's a huge bonus for us because any chronic disease where you have to essentially manage pain for a very long time comes with its own healthcare cost. Even just taking Panadol daily has pretty significant health risks associated with it, especially in an elderly population. So it's a pretty interesting upside for us, and we'd like to study it in this trial, and we're pretty confident that we're going to get an interesting signal. So our trial is progressing well. This is a sort of an actual against projection. We had informed the market that we will have a trial enrollment completed in Q4. Originally, we had sort of targeted for beginning of Q3, but nothing in clinical trials goes quite according to plan. We had launched the trial at the start of the year in January and February are not the most ideal months, particularly in cold parts of the United States, to get people out of their house and go and participate in a clinical trial. But overall, the numbers are picking up very nicely. We're expecting to get about $1,200 for a course of treatment for our product, and we've done all the pharmacoeconomic modeling to show that this is a really attainable number. And so if you start to multiply the patient opportunity by the revenue stream for this product, it's a very compelling opportunity. And I can tell you if this phase 2 trial is successful for us, this is not a 20% increase in the valuation of our company. This is a 5 to 7 times valuation increase in our company. So I fully appreciate that most people view biotechs as a sort of a binary event, and I think it's fair to say from a responsible investing vantage point that all biotechs are a binary event from trial to trial. But we have a lot of data that shows that there's a high probability that we'll be successful. So hopefully when we report that trial, we'll be able to demonstrate that to the market. So just to summarize, our phase 2 trial running in the United States right now will essentially kill 3 birds with 1 stone. It'll allow us to make a decision about whether we'll proceed to phase 3. There aren't a whole lot of ASX-listed companies that have a phase 3 product, and certainly not a lot of biotechs, frankly, that sit out there for very long with a phase 3 program in a major market opportunity. It's also our second pivotal trial for Europe, so it'll enable us to submit our product in Europe, perhaps as soon as the middle of next year. And last of all, we've always had interest from the pharmaceutical industry in the company, but they could never understand why we didn't run a proper clinical trial. And now that we are running a proper clinical trial, I'm sure that the results will be of interest. So just to wrap up, we just announced the hiring of a new CEO, an ex-Roche executive, very talented, and definitely nice to have a whiff of perfume in the corner office as well. We will have a recruitment update in about 10 days' time of where we're going with the trial. We'll be able to present our ocular program data about a week later. We'll also have an update at the end of July on our orphan drug program, which is a really exciting program. It's generated a lot of interest from the pharmaceutical industry. And hopefully, we're still shooting for top-line results from the trial by the end of Q4. It may drift slightly into early January, but we'll be giving more guidance on our clinical trial enrollment in about a week's time when we have the final set of numbers for the quarter. Thanks very much for your time. Appreciate it.